Hello learners, in this video lecture we will be talking about adult education and the role that NGOs perform in discharging this very important activity. My name is Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya and I am an Associate Professor in the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies at IGNOU. The lecture aims to sensitize you to the concepts of adult education and lifelong learning, and the role that NGOs can play in this regard. As you are aware, education and development are intimately connected, as education helps to empower individuals and communities with information and a positive attitude towards bringing about social change. One of the very important functions that NGOs perform is to bring about changes in the communities. And as we have just mentioned, the role of education in this regard is very vital. Education is not merely confined to children and youth in schools and educational institutions. Normally, when we think about the term, we always think of formal education. We think of children, we think of young people. However, if we reflect upon the concept of education, we realize that it is in fact a lifelong process. Throughout our lives, we keep learning new skills, upgrading existing ones, and we attempt to bring about a change in lives and circumstances. We find that as we move through life, different challenges may confront us, different opportunities may be there in front of us. And in order to grab these opportunities, in order to make a positive change in our lives, education is a very crucial factor. As also mentioned, education is an important aspect of social change in making a community move from one level to the next in terms of technology, in terms of values, in terms of its entire way of approaching life. So, in this particular lecture, we shall be focusing upon adult education. Now, adult education, as the name suggests, is the practice of teaching and educating adults. Adult education is not necessarily in a formal institutional setting. So it's not necessarily something that is done in schools or colleges or universities. Very often we find that adult education happens in the workplace. It may happen at home or even in a village common meeting place. This is because what adults actually bring to their education is very different from that of children, and we shall discuss this in a minute. However, adult education can also take place in a classroom or through what we call extension education in designated study centers. Adult education is being popularized through the idea of continuing education programs, which take place in schools, in college, and in universities. So, educating adults is qualitatively different from educating children. Remember that adults have accumulated knowledge, experience, a whole way of being in the world that can add to, or in some cases, prove to be a hindrance to the learning experience. So for instance, we may find that by working or being in the world of work, being in the world of householdership, these are things that can bring on the table very rich learnings that adults can then use to move from one level to the next in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their learning. However, sometimes we find that adults may also have very rigid attitudes, and this in fact may hinder their learning process. So therefore, the entire process of adult education has to be thought of very differently from the way in which we think about the education of children or young people. Adult education is a specialized educational methodology that requires a certain expertise. It is a whole area of study, it is a whole area of specialization, and therefore we cannot think about it or we cannot deal with it on the same terms as we deal with the education of children. So, it is not a regular school program that is conducted, but specially designed programs which equip people with skills and knowledge to cope better with their contexts as soon as possible, so that they are able to put into use their learnings in the real world and improve their circumstances. Related to adult education is a very, very important term that is used a great deal, and that is lifelong learning. So, it is never actually too late to learn. The great thing, the unique thing about our species, about human beings, is that we are always learning new things. There is no age at which we can say that it is not possible for us to learn anymore. There is no age at which we can say that all the learning that we have to do in life is over. As we transit from one stage in life to another, it is accompanied by different kinds of learnings. So, from the learning that we do in school, we move to higher education, we move to the professional workspace, we raise families, we do various activities, we discharge various roles and responsibilities, and all these roles and responsibilities demand learning. So the concept of lifelong learning basically refers to providing learning opportunities at all ages and in varied contexts, at work, at home, and through leisure activities. This concept of lifelong learning breaks away from the notion that education is what one receives for the first 12 years or the first 20 years of our life, and only through formal processes and institutions. The concept of lifelong learning basically implies that learning happens in all situations, formal as well as informal. Access to information and education through new technologies and networks has enabled people to significantly change and improve their lives. So we see in the world around us, we may not have expertise or training in all aspects of life. However, when we have access to information, there are many things we can do which would not have been possible had we not had access to that information. The UNESCO report, Learning, the Treasure Within, gave great emphasis to lifelong learning and identified the following pillars or the following very important dimensions of lifelong learning. The first is learning to know. Now, this is a very important concept. How do we learn to learn? By combining a sufficiently broad general knowledge with the opportunity to work in depth on a small number of subjects. Learning how to learn in order to benefit from the opportunities that lifelong learning offers is a very important aspect of the whole process. The second very important pillar is learning to do. This requires learning or acquiring not only occupational skills, but also the competence or the ability to deal with many situations and to work in teams. It also means learning to do in the context of young people's various social and work experiences, which may be informal as a result of the local or the national context. So learning how to do, learning how to work in teams, learning how to put into practice various occupational skills, all these come under the rubric of learning to do. Learning to live together. This is so important, particularly in today's world. How to develop an understanding of other people and an appreciation of the interdependence of communities and people all over the world. How to carry out joint projects and learn how to manage conflicts. And this calls for a fundamental respect for the values of pluralism, mutual understanding, and peace. Only when we respect the rights of others, only when we understand that people may be different from us and yet we can work with them, we can cooperate with them, we can learn to work in teams. Only this skill, only this ability is going to help us to make our community and to make the whole world a better place. And the fourth one, learning for life, which means being able to develop better our individual personalities and with more autonomy, being able to act with a better sense of judgment and increasing sense of responsibility. We see in the world around us that due to the irresponsible behavior of human beings, the very existence of the planet is under threat today. So learning to behave responsibly, learning to cooperate with each other, learning that our lives are part of the larger picture, these are all very, very important learnings that come under the category of lifelong learning. And it is through lifelong learning that individuals and communities can leverage the benefits of education and build a better lives for themselves. One of the very, very important aspects or very important dimensions of lifelong learning is distance education. Now, since we are conducting this particular course from IGNOU, distance education is something that is very, very dear to our hearts. And distance education has evolved into a highly effective mode for conducting adult learning programs. We find that earlier, distance education used to be merely confined to what is known as correspondence courses. However, over time, it has grown in leaps and bounds, and now it offers a holistic package and a complete learning experience to the adult learner. Learning in distance education is organized around observable and measurable outcomes or learning objectives. There are very clear expectations for particular professional requirements, and programs are designed to assist the learner to achieve these stated outcomes. These learning outcomes are clearly spelled out in terms of knowledge, skills, or attitudes. All these techniques are helping educators to take people from where they are to where they think they should be in order to bring development to their areas. NGOs play a very, very important role in this entire process, and by helping the communities that they work with to leverage or to take advantage of opportunities in distance learning, NGOs can play a very, very important role in bringing education to the people. Let's now talk about the role of NGOs in adult education. For adult education to be effectively implemented, long-term partnerships between government and civil society organizations, based upon appreciation of their respective strengths and mutual respect, must be evolved. So, only when government agencies and NGOs learn to work in tandem towards fulfilling this common goal can adult education be effectively implemented. Because one of the very, very important benefits that NGOs have is their closeness to the community, the fact that they actually work with stakeholders. The engagement of civil society needs to be systemic and not ad hoc or project-driven. So just undertaking one particular project or just undertaking some activity for a short period of time, that is not going to help to fulfill the long-term objective. There must be a properly planned and a long-term engagement which will enable NGOs to be able to deliver the goods in terms of adult education. NGOs can play a very, very important and vital role in bringing perspectives on important societal issues such as gender and social inclusion in order to make them cross-cutting concerns, informing different aspects of the adult education program. So because one of the very, very important work that is done by NGOs is to create social change, to work towards equality, to work towards social justice, when they are involved in adult education programs, these very, very important values can become an integral part of adult education programs. NGOs can also facilitate in adult education by keeping a watch on the adult learners and their needs and giving them support. They can also provide support to experts in many areas of provisioning of adult education. Because of their experience in working with the community, in working with areas pertaining to welfare, social justice, etc., NGOs can actually give a great deal of support to adult education programs. They can also be of immense help in training and capacity building of community-level organizations. And by developing culturally appropriate teaching learning materials, running industry-linked vocational education courses, and training literacy instructors, just to give a few examples, NGOs can play a very, very important role in facilitating adult education. So culturally appropriate teaching learning materials can be developed because, as I have mentioned earlier, NGOs are actually working on the ground, working with the stakeholders. They are aware of local circumstances, they are aware of the various industries, they are aware of the various vocational opportunities that may exist in that area, and therefore they can help to facilitate these linkages. And training of literacy instructors to go and actually work with people in the area is also a very, very important role that they can discharge. Now, the role of NGOs becomes particularly critical in working with marginalized communities. We see that communities or groups of people like migrant laborers, women, particularly housewives, slum dwellers, all these are sectors of society which have been denied access to education due to reasons of poverty and other related factors. And it is here that NGOs can play a vital role in the whole process of adult education. By working specifically with these marginalized communities in areas of skill development, reskilling, linking them with work, the whole enterprise of Atmanirbharta that is being so strongly emphasized by our government today is something that the interlinkage between NGOs and the local communities can be very, very important in fulfilling. NGOs can also provide a great deal of capacity or support to other organizations working in the field of adult education and thereby help to promote this goal of skilling, of imparting literacy, imparting training, and helping adults who are facing a lot of difficulties, particularly in the post-COVID scenario, to find a respectable and a dignified life. We have mentioned the post-COVID era. The post-COVID era is really going to be a very, very important and a very, very critical one, in which adult education is going to assume an important role. The new education policy that has been floated by the Government of India also emphasizes the role of adult education or the importance of adult education. And it is in this context that NGOs can discharge their functions and fulfill their social roles in ensuring that the majority of our population has access to literacy, has access to skills, and has access to a better life. To sum up what we have discussed in this particular lecture, the role of NGOs in providing education to different sectors of society is of the utmost importance. NGOs work with different categories of people across the social spectrum, ranging from children to adults, to persons with disability, to women and other sections of society. In this particular lecture, we have focused upon adult education. Adult education, as we have mentioned, does not refer just to education in the classroom or education to gain formal qualifications or skills. Adult education refers to basically teaching and training adults in various contexts, whether those be at home, whether those be at the workplace, or even within the community. Individuals, human beings, are characterized by the ability to learn throughout their lives. And the concept of lifelong learning, which is very closely related to that of adult education, reflects this important dimension. Life keeps throwing up opportunities and challenges, which individuals, which human beings, which communities have to face up to, which they can leverage to go ahead in life and to effect social change. And in facilitating this process of adult learning, of lifelong learning, NGOs, because of their closeness to the community, because of their work with the grassroots, and because of their intimate knowledge of the local level realities being experienced by different communities, can play a very, very important role. It is very important that they work in tandem with the policymakers, with the government agencies, in ensuring that every sector of society is able to acquire and is able to have access to the skills and to the information that they need in order to better their situation in life. Thank you very much.